The US has just about 90 million acres of this viral kid's absolute favorite food.
Corn.
What do you like about corn?
It's corn.
There's a reason people call it yellow gold. 2021's corn crop was worth over $86 billion.
According to the USDA, the U.S. is the largest consumer, producer, and exporter of corn in the world.
I mean, look at this chart of U.S. grain crops. And that's because
we're really good at it. And that's why you see big acres, big demand, export competitiveness. We're good at it.
It's not just what we eat, it's in what we buy and how we fuel up.
We've kind of turbocharged the value of corn through the application of science.
Corn is just getting more and more useful, which is causing not just the U.S. economy to rely on this grain, but also the rest of the world. At $2.2 billion in 2019, corn is the most heavily subsidized of all.
Do we get the corn acres because we've got the support, or do we have the support because we have the corn acres?
Here's how the United States became a corn powerhouse. There's sweet corn at barbecues or even your popcorn.
And then there's this corn. This corn is the majority of what's grown in the U.S.
Field corn is 99% of what you see when you drive down the road. The other 1% is sweet corn or edible corn. Corn is certainly used in many, many more ways than it was, say, in the 1950s and 60s.
A lot of the corn that's grown in the U.S. and traditionally was grown in the U.S. to be fed to livestock.
Animal feed accounts for about 40% of total domestic corn use. So even if you're not eating corn directly, it's being fed to the meat that Americans consume. Corn is milled by either a wet or dry process. So it's transformed into syrups and starches that also end up as ingredients in other processed foods people eat every day. Think high fructose corn syrup, corn oil, cereal, corn flour, corn grits, cornmeal, and much more.
A lot of corn is now going into biofuel production, specifically ethanol.
Just about every gallon of gasoline in the US contains up to 10% ethanol. Doing the math, in 2019, ethanol contributed more than $43 billion to the US GDP, and it added $23.3 billion to household income. All of this created over $10 billion in tax revenue that year.
These demands have kind of grown along with our really productive corn crops in the United States.
The U.S. wasn't always a corn superpower, which it is. We have the soils and climate on a wide scale, particularly in the U.S. Midwest.
A lot of this corn is grown here, which is why it's called the Corn Belt.
So I'm Seth Meyer. I'm USDA's chief economist. I'm an Iowan, if that helps with my authority on corn. U.S. producers just continue to show an upward trend of how many bushels they can get per acre.
There was a revolution in corn production after World War II.
As a weapon for our defense.
We can thank science and the private sector's plant breeding and genetics investments.
Filled with corn.
The overall number of farms growing feed grains like corn is declining, but the acreage dedicated to growing corn on those farms is growing.
At the same time, the amount of large corn farms has increased over time, outnumbering the amount of small corn farms in operation.
This is all to say that corn is big business, really big business, thanks to advances in seeds, fertilizers, and production practices.
These charts show how much corn crops in the U.S. are now producing. So even with more land dedicated to corn, the plant itself is yielding more of a harvest. And these charts show that the more corn the U.S. produces, the more valuable it gets. And that's just because supply is following demand. And demand is growing, not just from fuel and food in the U.S. The U.S. also exports a ton of corn.
The world also uses corn as a feed grain, and so we export to many countries.
Every year, an average of 15% of U.S. produced corn is exported, and that includes value-added products like ethanol.
Overall, corn production has increased. So U.S. was the major exporter of wheat for many, many years. Wheat production has fallen off, largely because corn and soybeans are far more profitable to grow for farmers.
Farmers have to consider a lot of different variables when it comes to what might impact their crops.
Is this year a better year to plant more corn or soybeans? What's going to be the impact of higher nitrogen prices? What about these new conservation programs in the new Farm Bill? What about carbon markets?
They live in somewhat of an environment of uncertainty. So producers are constantly looking at, what's my risks? What do I think prices will be?
Corn is too important for farmers, the U.S. economy, and world hunger to be left entirely to chance. So the government ensures the value through subsidies.
But corn is the primary beneficiary of the crop insurance program. There are subsidies for insurance. So crop insurance typically account for about 4 to 5% of the value of corn production.
It's more designed to be a safety net that says, okay, this isn't going to save you if you consistently have high costs or consistently are less productive. This isn't going to save you, but it will help you if there's a big adverse event.
For example, the 2022 October forecast for U.S. feed grain production, which is dominated by corn, is down 1 million tons due to summer drought conditions across the center of the country.
The programs started as a response to the depths of the Great Depression.
Subsidies will cost the nation nearly $1 billion
where literally people were starving. Particularly after World War II, there was a great debate, well, we're not in the Great Depression anymore. Can't we just get rid of these programs? And that's kind of been the theme ever since.
There's two dominant avenues for subsidies: crop insurance and income support programs.
Essentially, farmers have a choice to take one or the other, and they're both income programs that one's triggered on prices. So if prices go below a certain level, then they're eligible for a payment on those historical acres that they are based on what you historically grew, not what you currently grow. So you can grow soybeans but still receive a corn payment. That's something called the Price Loss Coverage Program, or PLC. And then the other one is the agricultural risk coverage, and that's based on revenue. So if the calculated revenue this year for your farm is less than the guarantee that's provided by the program, you'll get a payment. Over the last 5 years, the average payment was roughly $13 per acre. And many years they were zero. Like this current year, there's no money going to corn producers because prices are so high and revenues are so high, they're not triggering payments.
According to the Congressional Budget Office, the federal crop insurance program's net spending will increase to nearly $40 billion from 2021 through 2025. At the same time, farmland values have reached all-time record highs. This isn't to say that farmland values are reaching these highs because of increased subsidies. This is correlation, not causation.
The value of that land is intimately connected to the value of corn.
A lot of these subsidies, they do get embedded into the cost of farmland, essentially bid up the price of farmland marginally. And so the benefits accrue largely to those who own land, and we'll probably see farmland's value inflated just a little bit because of these subsidies. Price of land is so expensive, it's very hard to be a new farmer when, land is going for $15,000 an acre.
While these insurance programs provide key financial safety for farmers, Congress may revisit how to improve these policies and programs to make them more efficient and equitable. If subsidies are baked into the cost of the land, removing that money from the equation could throw off the debt-to-asset ratio of some farms.
Farmland values that are connected to the programs, but it's the debt obligations that have been incurred based on the expectation that assets will be supported by the farm programs. Right now, I don't think it would happen, but you can make an argument that if you made the sector go cold turkey, you would certainly raise the specter of a financial crisis because asset values would fall, debt obligations don't change.
Just like the average U.S. consumer, inflation is a top concern for farmers.
And combating changing climates while rethinking how some subsidies are utilized is a big factor when considering how to move forward.
Temperature changes and climate changes, we're going to need to have adaptation.
There are possibilities to take subsidies and repurpose them in more directed, targeted ways to reduce nitrogen runoff or to address certain climate issues and things like that. There a report called the $1 Billion Opportunity, which looked at removal of subsidies and what effects they would have.
Out of the worldwide nearly $540 billion spent a year on agricultural support, the report found that at least 87% of that money supports measures that are often inefficient, inequitable, distort food prices, hurt people's health, and degrade the environment. However, the report found if those subsidies were removed altogether,
the effects were pretty small. And that's not saying that that's not a good reason to get rid of subsidies, because I think if you look at some of the impacts on, say, climate, on greenhouse gas emissions for things like livestock production, they had a pretty big impact.
So repurposing the programs, rather than getting rid of support altogether, could be more effective, according to the United Nations Environment Program.
Say, how do we kind of put some stability or the safety net under this program, and how do we do it in a sustainable way? So I think that that's going to be the challenges going forward, and it's in the middle of an environment where lots of folks are concerned about climate.
And then the other big issue is, how do you do it in a way that ensures that there's compliance?
The report outlines 6 steps for rethinking and repurposing subsidies. Estimate the existing support, figure out the impact of that support, design a new approach based on needed reforms, estimate the future impact of a new repurposing strategy, review and refine the strategy before it's implemented, monitor the outcomes of the new agricultural producer support.
The administration right now is pushing a lot of so-called climate smart agricultural practices. But the trick is, how do you do it in a way that you achieve true additionality? That is, you really do reduce carbon, and you aren't just rewarding farmers for things they might do anyway.